Welcome back from the break. Test. Okay. Okay, welcome back from the break. Thank you. So I'm pleased to introduce Lars, and I'm sorry, but Skytte. Lars owns and runs hockeystatistics.com. He's also the coach of the U19 men's Danish national floorball team. And today he's going to talk to us about visualizing Sportlogiq's play-by-play data.
So thank you. My name is Lars Skytte, and I'm Danish, and I coach in floorball. I played hockey growing up as well, but that's a long time ago. But you can go to my website, hockey-statistics.com, and in there you can actually find this project as well. So there's an article to it, and you can just click on it. And in here, the visualization is, so I'll just do the presentation within the actual tool instead of doing a PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so let's start off by talking about the data used in this project. So it's data from Sportlogiq. It's play-by-play data. It's from the PWHPA season, 22-23 season. And this specific data was released to be part of a competition last year at Women's Hockey Analytics Conference. So that's why I have access to it. It's freely out there for everyone to work with. A few comments about the data. It doesn't have any shift data, and there's no information about on-ice information. So we only have information about the event player. We don't have any information about who's on the ice at that event. So that just limits our ability to do any on-ice statistics. Regarding the XG model, it's based on all shot attempts, which is fine. It's just something worth knowing. So if you wanted to do goaltender analytics, I would prefer doing it based on a shot on net XG model, but that's not possible with this particular data set. So the last thing I want to say is that it's just 40 games. So I only have access to 40 games, so the sample size is relatively limited. About the project, well, the absolute main goal with this project is to create something that just visualizes data. So we have this amazing Sportlogiq data, and we just wanted to create a tool best possible to visualize this data with as few constraints as possible. So we wanted to create something where you could go in and look at something very, very specific, or you could look at something different, very, very specific, or you could zoom out and look at it in a broader picture. So that was the goal. So I didn't set out to answer one specific question. That's not the goal here. If you do that, you're already walking down one path. I wanted to have a tool where you could walk down multiple paths. So that's the thought process behind it. So then as a secondary goal, you can start asking questions. Once the tool has been built, you can start, how can I use this tool? So that's the secondary goal for me. And finally, I wanted to create something that actually speaks hockey language. So I wanted to create something that coaches can use, that players can use. And all coaches, all players are very, very comfortable with viewing lines on a whiteboard. Ever since they were 6 years old, they've been used to seeing drills drawn up on a whiteboard. They're used to seeing strategies, tactics drawn on a whiteboard. So I want to use that and just have a tool where you can plot events and possessions on a rink, because that's a language that coaches and players actually understand. Okay, so before we get started to talk about the tool, I just have a really, really short theory section here. So in the article on my website, you can see I'll go into more details. But just in general, I think you do player evaluations through those typical 4 pillars. So you talk about how good is the player technically, how good is he tactically, how good is he mentally, how good is he physically. But I think you miss a few points when that's the only way you evaluate players. So I like to look at players through the actions that they make. So every single play a player makes is actually a 3-step process. So first, the player has to scan the ice, the perception part, then he has to make a decision, and then he has to execute the play. So that gives us a better understanding of where the player is struggling and where the player is strong. So perhaps a player is strong in the perception part, but not so much in the decision-making part. If you only look at it through the 4 pillars, then you'll just see this player is struggling tactically, but you don't know if it's the perception part that is the problem or if it's the decision-making that's the problem. And it's 2 different skill sets, and it's 2 different ways you need to practice it. So that's my theory. The important thing is that it's not just about how good you are at your perception. It's not just how good you are at the decision-making, how good you are at executing plays, but it's also about how quickly you can do it. So how quickly can you scan the ice? How quickly can you make a decision? How quickly can you execute a play? Obviously, making decision is quicker if you do it on instinct compared to doing it like a thought-out strategy. So it makes sense that executing a shot quickly is often more important than shot power and shot accuracy, simply because you don't allow the goaltender to get squared. Okay, so why is this relevant to this project, to this data? Well, with this data, you can actually determine when the player gains possession of the puck and when he executes a play. So you have a way to quantify the time it takes to execute a play. Obviously, the player should start the perception part and the decision-making part before gaining possession of the puck, but it's still a way to quantify how quickly he can execute a play. So I hope that makes sense. So let's just go to the actual tool. So we'll start off by looking at the events rink visual. So this is actually quite basic. It simply plots events based on the filters that you choose. So in this case, it's Kristen Richards, all her events at even strength in this specific game. So that's just what it is. It plots all the events. So a black line is a puck carry, a blue line is a completed pass, a red line is an incomplete pass, a yellow line is a dump in or dump out, and a double arrow, like you have here, is a shot attempt. Can be a block shot, can be a goal, can be anything. So you can choose to filter the data differently. So perhaps you only want to look at completed passes. Then you filter it down to completed pass. And you see here that there are both a black line and a blue line. That's because you still have the puck carry up until the pass is made. But you also have the pass. So if you only want to look at the passes, you can select the lines filter and you can say, we only want to see the passing lines. So now you have a passing map of all the passes being made by Kristen Richards at even strength in this game. So we could say, let's look at her passes in all games. And you get a passing map. So clearly she's a right defender. You see that in the offensive zone, making most passes from the right point position. Interestingly enough, it's much more symmetrical in the defensive zone. So they are probably not playing a strict zone defense, because then you would expect her to have more passes on the right side, but they're probably playing some kind of man coverage, would be my guess. I don't know. But that's how the tool works. You could even say we only want to look at completed passes to the slot area, and then it will show that. So that's how the tool works. You can go in and you can look at something very, very specific. Now, there is a different yet similar tool, but it's a possessions rink visual tool. So this is similar, except it filters the data differently. So now we are not filtering data based on the event selections, but we're filtering the data based on team possessions. So in this case, it's not events by Kristen Richards. It's events, it's team possessions where Kristen Richards has at least one puck touch. That's how the data is filtered. So again, we could say, let's just unfilter. Then it shows all team possessions. And you can see there's too many lines to really conclude anything from here. But you could say, let's look at only team possessions that lead to a goal. So in this game, Harvey scored 2 goals. And you could say, let's look at all goals that Harvey scored. So now it just filters all the team possessions that lead to a goal. That's how this data is filtered. So you can see statistics on the events. You could see statistics on the possessions. And in the possession statistics page, you can even click on a particular team possession, and I will show that particular team possession. So you can switch between the possessions. So I think it's important to be able to both filter the data based on events, but also based on team possession. It's two different things you can look up. Okay, I hope that made sense. The last thing I want to talk about is the chart visuals. So other than ring visuals, I've also created a chart visual. So we'll just start off by unfiltering everything. Okay, so now it just shows all events at even strength. And the value that I selected is just a simple count. So it just counts all events at even strength. Nothing else is selected. You can choose a different category, or you can choose a different value, a different measure to show. But we don't have much time, so I'll just focus on completed passes and incomplete passes. Okay, so this is just a simple count, not too interesting. There are more completed passes than incomplete passes. But instead of that, we want to look at the average possession time. So now it shows the average possession time of a completed pass compared to the average possession time of an incomplete pass. So we see here quite clearly that an incomplete pass has a shorter possession time. So here it's 0.69 seconds. For a completed pass, it's 1.08 seconds that a player possesses the puck before making a completed pass. So this is quite obvious, I think, that if the defensive team manages to put pressure on the puck carrier has less time on the puck and more likely to make a passing mistake. But the interesting part is, so as a legend, we could select zones. So now we see the possession times based on which zone it's in. And we see something really interesting because the possession time between completed passes and incomplete passes is only different in the defensive zone. In the neutral zone and in the offensive zone, there's no real difference in possession times between completed passes and incomplete passes. So here's my interpretation of that. So I think in the defensive zone, mistakes in terms of incomplete passes comes from being pressured by an aggressive forecheck. So it comes when the forecheckers are able to take away time and space, then you make mistakes. In the offensive zone, it's a little bit different because in the offensive zone, mistakes is not so much from being pressured, but it's more from going for the difficult pass. So in the offensive zone, you go for the slot pass or you go for the cross ice pass, and it has a higher probability of being an incomplete pass. So that would be my interpretation of this anyway. Okay. So finally, we could do some possession time analysis based on shots. So I'll just filter the data a little bit different here. So now we'll look at Corsi shooting percentage. So that's just what is the probability, or that means how many goals are being scored per shot attempt. So what is the goal probability? And obviously, when you're sorting by goal, so sorting by events, goals is the only way you can score goals. So instead of choosing event as the select category, we'll choose possession time. So now it shows the goal probability based on possession times. So we see here that the goal probability is highest if the shot is being taken within the first half second of a possession. Okay. The interesting thing is that after a half a second, there doesn't appear to be any clear difference between the goal probability. So I would have thought that even taking a shot after 1 second would still be an advantage. But based on this data, again, the sample size is relatively small, but it would appear that after half a second, that is enough for a goaltender to get squared. So the advantage of shooting quickly only exists in the first half second. At least that would be my interpretation based on this data. Yeah, so I also have a team analysis visual in this tool, but I think we are running out of time, so I'll just go to the conclusions instead. So the goal we set out to do was we wanted to create something that could visualize this data in the best way possible, where you could zoom in on a very specific question, or you could zoom out and look at something really broadly. So for instance, you could say, what is the average possession time by a defender versus a forward in the offensive zone? And you could just go look it up. I don't know, but you could look it up with this tool. And I also think you can use this tool from a coaching perspective. Like that's my background in mind thinking, could I use this? And that's why I built it. That's the thought process behind building it this way. This is something I could show my players. See, you have problems in this particular area or something like that. We did a very, very quick possession time analysis. And what we found out was that incomplete passes have a much lower, much shorter possession time in the defensive zone. But anywhere else, there's no real difference between possession time of completed passes and incomplete passes. We also found out that shooting the puck within the first half second of gaining possession of it increases the goal probability. After that, there's no real difference based on this data. So what could you do with this in the future? So my next step would be to, instead of just plotting events on a rink, we saw that when we didn't really filter it much, there was just too many lines to conclude anything from it. So I would create heat maps instead, so you could see how many shots are we. You have the classical heat map of shot attempts, but you could do passing maps or puck protections or checks or whatever you could put on a heat map, or you could even do possession time based on positioning on the ice. So you could do heat maps of that, so you could see directly where the players are possessing the puck. And if you had access to actual tracking data, you could do just positioning maps on a heat map. So you could say this player is playing here. This is where the player positions himself in terms of how many seconds he is at each area, and you could do plots of that. So that would be something that could be cool. Using this data, you could also do a simple shot aim visual. So you have information about where the shot is being aimed at and in this data. So you could do a visual just showing where goaltenders are weak and strong, very much a handball thing. So you could even use it on shooters. So saying this shooter tendencies, this tends to shoot more on the left side or more on the right side. You could look that up with a shot aim visual, I think. And finally, like the other group talked about, you could try and define player types, maybe creating player cards. So you could try and define what characterizes a playmaker, what characterizes a shooter or a puck carrier, and you could use that. So that would be my next steps into building things for sure. So I think that's my presentation. Time for questions.
Great talk. Technical question. What visual were you using for the rink?
Sorry?
The rink visual, what kind of visual is that in Power BI?
Oh, yeah. So it's all built in Power BI, as you can see. It's actually a map visual called icon map.
Icon map, okay, thanks.
When you just change the background.
I guess that you have an CSV file in the backend, like preset, or do you grab the data via an API so that the teams can visualize their stuff right after a game?
Sorry?
Do you use an API to get live data or nearly live data, or in that example, do you have a database that you have prepared?
Yeah, so I don't have access to any Sportlogiq data. So this is just data released for a competition last year. So obviously you could set this up in a way. I don't know how teams are getting Sportlogiq data actually. So, but you could create it in a live situation, I suppose. There are some data transformations, but you could do that live. I don't see any problems with that. But here it's just a data set that I downloaded and then I worked on that.
That was great. Thanks a lot. Yeah, these are beasts of files, so getting the chance to visualize it is helpful, I think. One thing I was curious about is just why all the possessions were straight lines. I would have thought that they would be, curved, or that people don't always skate in a straight line. So do you know why that's the case?
Yeah, that's because I don't have any knowledge about where the player actually possessions himself or herself in this case. I just know where the possessions start because it's based on event data. So I have the possession start and I have the end start. So that's why it's all straight lines. You could have a player circling the net and would just show from A to B. So that's why.
Is the format of the data, like, is it documented? Like, what I'm wondering is, if we produced our data in a format that was similar, could we use this tool?
Yeah, for sure. It's just play-by-play data. It's just you need to determine when the possession starts, and you need to determine when the possession ends, and then you can just draw lines between those two.
Right, and so imagine, like, I'm imagining this is a bunch of CSV files or something, and as long as we know the columns and the format, we could probably use the tool.
Yeah. I mean, so it's just the visual is just about putting out points and creating lines between the points. So for the puck carries, I've just took the event and then I took the possession of the previous event by the same player. So it's actually unlike going the opposite direction, whereas passes goes from the event and to the reception. So no more? No?
And maybe one last one, are the teams that were participating, are they aware of the tool? Have you approached them to let them know?
No. The league doesn't exist anymore. It was shut down and now there's the new PWHL league.
Okay.
You're welcome.